Please welcome our very dear friend and one of the greatest guys on the planet, Mr. Terry White.
Thanks, Scott. I'm really excited to be here today to not only show you some of my favorite new things that we've added over the past few months, but when we think back, it was actually 2019 was the last in-person Photoshop World. And so I went through and I looked at all the new features that were added to Photoshop and Lightroom and new products. And I thought, wow, I got a lot to show, but I only have a few minutes to show it. So I cherry-picked some of my favorite new features. This is by no means everything we've done in the last 2 years, but it's some of the best stuff. Let's start off in Lightroom Classic, where I want to put together a panorama. I've got a few images from Iceland. I'm just going to go ahead and right-click on those and go to Photo Merge, Panorama, as we have many times before. It's not an HDR, so I'm just going to say no to this message. And when it comes up, we get this white space. And in the past, you might have auto-cropped it and then really got a really short pano that way, a really from top to bottom short one. So then we added boundary warp, the ability to kind of massage the image to fill the space. And that's cool to be able to do that as well. But now we brought over some of that content-aware fill technology from Photoshop that allows me to get this new checkbox called Fill Edges. Once I do Fill Edges, it will actually fill in that white space with parts of the image. And you can combine that with boundary warp if you feel that parts of your image were repeated too much because it was so far away from the edge, and you get the perfect pano that way. Now, once I go ahead and click Merge, that will create a brand new file from those 5 images, even if they were shot in JPEG. It will make a new raw DNG file. And that way, I get the best of both worlds. I get a new file that I can do anything I want to in terms of editing. So I can go right into the Develop module, continue massaging this file. It already got an auto tone, but I'm going to bump up the exposure a little bit. And I could just keep working on this all day long, especially by adding like a little bit of dehaze to it as well. So with that said, that is the new Fill Edges in Pano. Next up, let's go ahead and take a look at multiple batch export. So for example, let's say I wanted to take that new pano, I wanted to take this other Iceland shot, and maybe a shot from the lake near my house. Actually, not that one. Let's take this flower shot. There we go. I wanted to export these out together. Let's do an export. And you'll notice that if you have presets that you've created, you now have checkboxes next to those presets. So for example, I can go all the way down to my For Web preset, and what this allows me to do is to export those same images in multiple different sizes and ways without me having to do them one at a time. If I don't choose a folder, they'll go into their respective folders that were set up in the presets themselves. Once I choose export, it'll batch each one based on those presets that I already did and start to bring up those results in my various folders. So if you can imagine having 100 or 1,000 images that you need to export out for web, for print, for email, for some watermarks, some not, this would allow you to do it all at once. So that's the new batch export. Next up, let's talk about local hue. And I almost hate bringing up a flower image after Scott gave us that critique, but I'm going to take my chances here, and hopefully he won't judge this one too harshly. So I've got an image that I would love to do a local adjustment on. Now we know that we can use the adjustment brush, and I can go in. As a matter of fact, I've already got one there. Let's delete that one. And I can go in and I can just start painting on this image. Now, because the adjustments aren't set to do anything right now, we don't really see anything happening. But we know we can go in and change the temperature, you can change the exposure, you can do anything like that, but you'll notice that there's a new section called Hue. And the reason it's called Local Hue is because it's for your local adjustments, your adjustment brush, your radial and gradient filters. So I can change where I brushed to change it to a different color using the Hue slider. And the Hue slider is actually giving me the information of what I'm going to get by telling me if I drag to the right, it's going to kind of turn it green and blue because that's the color right above the indicator. And if I drag it to the left, it's going to make it more in the purples and oranges and so forth and so on. And as I see it now, I can see any areas I would have missed, and I can continue to go in and paint and change things locally with the local hue. Now, along those same lines, we have another adjustment for doing color grading. Now, color grading is huge, especially you see it all the times in video and film. You see it in the movies. So with color grading, that allows me to go in, and I can see that this image has had some grading done to it. Let's reset that. I can see with color grading, you have the ability to go in and change the mood of an image. So for example, when you see a movie set or you see a movie, you can tell, well, oh my God, they're making that scene look super cold because it's usually bluer and colder looking. Or they're making it look super hot by making it the whole scene kind of warmer and more yellow. So with color grading, you can now do that with your photos. You can do it just to kind of change the mood of a photo or to make photos match other photos that were taken at different times in different locations. So I get the ability to do it for my shadows, midtones, and highlights. The midtones are at the top, so if I wanted to make the midtones a little bluer, a little colder, I can do that. This was already in Iceland, it was already cold, but we can make this just have that more cold feel to it. Or I can make it warmer. I can warm it up and make it look like those that mountain area that the sheep are on is in the summertime and make it warmer. So you can do that with any area of the photo, midtones, shadows, and highlights, and kind of even set them differently to get the effect that you want. So that is the new color grading, both in Lightroom Classic and Lightroom. Local Hue is also in Lightroom as well as Lightroom Classic. Now I don't have my camera connected, but I do want to point out that in Lightroom Classic, we do have tethering, which we've had for years, but the tethering has been improved to support live view. That was a big request. I used to get that all the time from people wanting to see on the screen in tether capture exactly what they were going to get before they snap the shutter with tether capture. So that now supports Canon and Nikon, different models of cameras. Now there have been several performance improvements along the way in Lightroom Classic as well, so you'll see faster grid scrolling, just faster performance across the board. Now next up, I'm going to switch over to Lightroom. So we have Lightroom Classic, the traditional product that we've used for years. We have Lightroom that's kind of more cloud focused, that backs up your images and syncs them to your mobile devices. And one of the things that I noticed in shooting on my new phone, my new iPhone 12 Pro Max, is that the images at first didn't really look as good as they looked on screen. They didn't really look as good as they looked when I was looking at them on the phone. And that's because I was shooting in RAW. And as we know, when you bring a RAW image into Lightroom, the idea is that Lightroom doesn't do anything to it, doesn't process it. That's the reason you shot in RAW. Well, people shooting on a phone kind of don't like that. They actually like the image to look good the minute they see it in the computer. So along the way, we created a Apple ProRAW profile for your ProRAW images. So for example, this image is in Adobe Color. It's tomatoes, it looks okay, but if I go to ProRAW, we can really see what that shot looked like when I saw it on my phone. It's a night and day difference from what we were getting. Now you might be thinking, oh my God, do I have to go back and change all my images that I shot with my new phone to the Apple ProRAW profile? And the answer is no. Any early images you shot that you brought in that were still on Adobe Color, yes. But any images you bring in now automatically switch to this profile when you bring them in. So that is the new Apple ProRAW profile that you get now automatically when you bring in your Apple ProRAW images. Next up, let's talk about images that were shot maybe at a lower resolution or images that aren't as big as you need them to be. So both in Lightroom Classic and in Lightroom, as well as Camera Raw, we have the ability to use a new feature called Enhanced Detail. So if I right-click on this old photo and I go into Enhance, I have a feature called Super Resolution. And what Super Resolution will do is it will automatically double the resolution of whatever photo it is. So this is a relatively small JPEG, less than a megapixel, and it will basically double it without losing any quality. That's the benefit. And from here, what I'd love to do is show them side by side. Now, if I go full screen and go side by side, you really can't even tell that I'm doing it because they look exactly the same. So let's go to Loop View. There's the original JPEG. And if I hit the right arrow key, there is the new double the resolution size image. So this one is now 1630 by 1548 versus the original one, which was 815 by 774. And the quality of the image is exactly the same as the original. No loss in quality whatsoever, and you get twice the resolution for making prints. That's the new super resolution built into Lightroom Classic, Lightroom, and Camera Raw. Now, let's talk about sharing. So we know that we can share the image out. We can make a JPEG, we can share out the image, we can share it, put it on email, put it on social, choose different sizes. But in Lightroom, both on desktop and your phone, you have the ability to share one more way. You have the ability to share the actual edit. When you share an edit, you're sharing basically the process and everything you've done to the image so that people can get inspiration from your edits. These are shared in a special gallery available to Lightroom users that you can look at on your home screen to see all your favorite photographers and their most recent edits and how they did them. And if you want, you can even enable the ability to save it as a preset. So if the person likes the look of the final result of your image, they can save that look as a preset and apply it to their images without having to do all the steps manually. So that's share inspirational edits. And while we're on the topic of sharing, there's one more type of sharing that I really love, and that is the ability to share the album for edits. So for example, if I choose share and invite, we've had share album for a while where people can look at your images, they can download your images, but there's one more feature that's been added to this, and that's this third button over here on the right. So share that they can just look at them, share that they can add images to your album as well, and this last one is they can not only contribute, but they can also edit. So this question comes up a lot from people that may be shooting and they have an editor back in the office. They want to shoot, have the images upload to the cloud, have the editor back in the office actually start making edits to the image. And that can now happen with the can edit and can contribute in the share from Lightroom. So with that said, those are a few things of my favorites in Lightroom and Lightroom Classic. Now let's go ahead and switch gears and switch over to Photoshop. So I'm gonna head over to Photoshop on desktop, and I've got Photoshop open, and one of the first things you'll notice is I got a layer, and that layer is just simply a duplicate of the sky. And I would love to see what that layer would look like if I applied blend modes. Now, blend modes are those things that if you know what you want, then you can just quickly go to it. But if you don't know what you want, you need to see them first, you're having to click on each one to see what it will look like. Now, as I hover over each one of these, I can see what they look like without having to choose them. And I can see that I actually want linear blur or burn. And that will give me the look that I want non-destructively as a blend mode. All right, next up, let's go ahead and head over to one of my other favorites, which is anything content-aware fill-wise. So we have this image that I have open here, and you can see that she's standing in front of a railing. I would love to remove that railing. So to save time, I've gone ahead and just made a simple selection of the railing. So I'm just going to choose load selection, and I'm just going to choose the railing selection that I made earlier. And you can see it's a very loose, anyone can do this selection. I just did it with the lasso, selected both sides of the railing. So I don't have to take time doing it now. Now, I could do content aware just by hitting delete or backspace and hope for the best. But we don't have to hope for the best anymore. So what I'm going to do is now go up to my edit menu, come down to the new content aware fill workspace. And what the content aware fill workspace does is it shows me the areas that are included or excluded. On the right-hand side, it actually shows me the preview of the image that I would have if I were to accept it. And it looks like it did a pretty good job removing the railing, but I can kind of see a problem here. So I'm just going to zoom into this area right by her arm and shoulder here. I can see that it's probably bringing in a little too much. And I can see that it's basically including parts of the image that I don't want. So I'm going to hold down my Option key and tell it, or actually not going to hold down my Option key, I'm just going to go ahead and mask in this area that I don't want it to use when it pulls from the side of the image here. Just don't include any of this shirt, any of her arm, and you could say basically don't include any of her. You could paint as much as you want, but that wasn't the problem. It was just including a little bit too much from that side of her arm. So once I let go, it should recalculate and show me what it's going to get from that. And there's still a little bit more, but I can see that that's now coming from other parts of the image. So I can say exclude this, this fire escape and exclude this little part here. And I can keep working with it until it excludes the areas that I don't want it to bring over. And we'll just let it recalculate. Oh, a little too much. Undo. And just that part, and we should be good to go. All right, perfect. So now it will smooth out that edge as it just did, and I can click OK, and that will come in as a new layer or to the existing layer, whatever I choose, and that will be the new content-aware fill with the railing completely gone and nice and clean. And because it's on its own layer, if I still need to clean up areas, I still can. So that's the new content-aware fill workspace. All right, next up, let's go over to our next image. And in our next image, we're going to talk about making selections. I can't believe that it's been, almost a year since we had this feature added, but it was certainly introduced since the last Photoshop World. And that is the new object selection tool. With the object selection tool, it's like select subject on a tool. So for example, I have the ability to choose it as a rectangle or a lasso. And as I drag it around things in this image, like this peach over here on the right-hand side, even though I drag a big liberal rectangle around it, it decides what should be selected based on how big that rectangle is and what's inside of it. So it basically looked inside that rectangle and said, I'm going to do a select subject based on just this area of the photo. And it did that. So same thing if I do it around this cheese, and even if I don't get all of the cheese, let's say I don't include all of it, it's smart enough to know that he must have wanted that object, and it includes that object. So you can either do this with the lasso or with the rectangle part of this tool. So even if I want one of the pits inside, very easily and very quickly able to make those selections. Now, while I've got this nicely, beautifully colored array of food, I love the colors in this image. And I would love to get some of those colors, or maybe some of the other aspects of this image in my library to be used elsewhere. So I think it was 2019 when I showed Adobe Capture as an app. Well, Adobe Capture has actually made its way into Photoshop. So if I click the plus sign on my library, I can choose Create from Image, and it has the Capture logo on it. When I choose Create from Image, that brings up Adobe Capture. And the first thing you notice is that it's offering to create a pattern from this image, and that's pretty cool. I can also do vector shapes, and I can go to color themes, which is what I really wanted. So I can drag around and get the colors that I want in this image. So I like that yellow. I like the other colors that are there. So if I'm happy with those colors, I can just go ahead and save this color theme to my library like that. And that color theme is instantly added to my library, and I can use those colors anywhere, not just in this image, but in any image going forward, and any Adobe application going forward from that matter. And I even have the ability to do gradients as well. So that's Adobe Capture built into Photoshop now. Now, next up for my graphic designers, you may be at some point needing to create a pattern, and patterns have always been something you created blindly. Like you kind of design the one single tile, and then you create a pattern and see what it looks like. But what if you could create that pattern and see it as you're doing it? So if I go up to the window menu and I come down to, actually I go up to View and I come down to Pattern Preview, that will show me this document as a pattern. So even if I zoom out, I can see that, yeah, I've got everything there. And I've got some other layers that are turned off. So if I go ahead and turn those layers on, I can see what my pattern looks like. But it's not a turn it on, see what it looks like, turn it off. This is actually live. So as I move things around, as I scale things, as I rotate, my pattern will change accordingly, and I'll see the pattern that I'm going to get. Even if I introduce new elements to the document, so I drag over these cookies, it will update the pattern and show me the pattern in real time. Even if I drag slightly outside of the canvas area, it still respects the object and creates the pattern accordingly. Now, all I have to do is bring up the pattern panel, click Add Pattern, and I know exactly what my pattern is going to look like based on how I designed it and how I preview it here. So that's the new pattern preview that you can turn on at any time. Now, this is near and dear to my heart, especially for my photographers in the audience, people that love to do photography, and you're maybe working on a day that Mother Nature is not cooperating. Now, replacing the sky in an image manually on a regular image, not a big deal. But when you've got an image like a bridge, or in this case, the Eiffel Tower, where you've got all these little intricate details in the object itself, where the sky is showing through, that's when it becomes hard. So if I go up to sky replacement, under the edit menu, and it will use the last sky that I used, or the last sky that I chose, it will show me the sky, and it basically, I like the sky, I'm going to use it, but it's showing me the sky through all of the details inside the Eiffel Tower. And if you want to add your own sky, this is another late breaking addition, you have the ability to add your own skies from day one. So I've got this sky in TW Skies, so that's one of mine. But before, you could only add them one at a time. Meaning if you click Add Sky, you select one, add it, name it. Select the next one, add it, name it. If you had 100 skies, you'd have to do it 100 times. Well, I'm happy to announce that when you go to add your own skies, you can select up to 5,000 skies at one time. So a whole folder of skies comes in all at once into your folder, and you've got skies for days. The other thing that makes this feature really cool is that when I do click OK, you'll notice that it created a layer group from that sky. So I can go in at any time and turn it on, turn it off, but more importantly, I can go in and see the mask and tweak the mask that it generated at the click of a button to maintain all the details in the Eiffel Tower, but let the sky show through. All right, next up, let's talk about cloud documents. Cloud documents basically allow me to save the image to the cloud. So if I choose Save As, I still have the ability to save the image locally to my hard drive as I always did, but I have the ability to also now save it as a cloud document. Why would you do this? Number one, you can save it as a cloud document so that when you go to your computer at home or the office and you launch Photoshop, it's already there. Just open it up. The other reason is because you're working with Photoshop on another platform. And let's talk about that right now. So I'm going to switch platforms. I'm going to switch over to my iPad. And believe it or not, Photoshop for iPad came out since the last Macs, and I would love to give you a quick demo. So let's launch Photoshop. I'm on my iPad Pro. Those are my cloud documents that I've saved so far. And I'm going to go ahead and open up one of the cloud documents, and we've got it right here. Next up, I'm going to go ahead now and add a new layer. But before I get into the layer, let's talk about the interface a little bit. On the left-hand side, I've got my familiar tools that I work with all the time. In the middle, I've got my canvas. I've also got a touch indicator. So this touch indicator, think of it as the ability to like hold down an Option key or an Alt key and apply other options as needed, depending on what tool you've got selected. Then on the right-hand side, I've got my layers, which I can expand out and see like regular layers, or condense down for space. So the next thing I'd love to do is I want to go in, and actually let's delete that text layer that I just created by accident. So next up, I'd love to add a new layer. And I'm going to add a new layer, but not just an empty layer. I'm going to add a new layer from content that's either already on my device or already in the cloud. I've got a Photoshop World Keynote library that I want to pull from. So there it is. There's my Photoshop World Keynote. I'm going to go to my Not Grouped, and I'm going to grab an astronaut. So that brings in this stock image of an astronaut. It's already in free transform, so I can go ahead and scale it down. Let's make it a little smaller. And you might have caught the Keynote movie. I think we're going to do a little play on that. So let's go ahead and lock it in. Now, the next thing I need to do is knock out the original background. So let's go ahead and make a selection. And let's do a select subject right here on the iPad. Once I do a select subject, I can go ahead and tap mask and mask out that background. Next thing I need to do is we had a late breaking astronaut substitution. I need to bring in our new astronaut. So let's go ahead and go back to new layer one more time from our libraries, from that Photoshop World Keynote library into my astronauts group. There's our new astronaut, ready to go, and let's send Scott into space. So we need to make the head about the same size. That's about right. Maybe a little smaller. A little smaller. And I could lower the opacity, but let's go ahead and lock it in right there. It's about the size I want. Now that we got it, let's go ahead and add a layer mask to that layer. Grab our paintbrush. Using my Apple Pencil with pressure sensitivity, I can just easily go in and mask out the area of the old photo that I don't want. There we go, quickly and easily. I could do a select subject as well, but this is just as easy and just as fast. And it also allows me to paint in the microphone. There we go. Those microphones coming in, and we got our new astronaut in place. And that's just a quick look at Photoshop on iPad. Once I'm there, it's automatically saving this layered file back to Creative Cloud as a cloud document. I can open up any layered file with as many layers, smart objects, or anything else I want. And I have basically Photoshop with me on the go at all times on my iPad. So those are, again, just a few of my favorite features across Lightroom and Photoshop. And with that, thank you, everyone. That's my time, and I had a pleasure showing you everything that was new since the last Photoshop World from Adobe.